Hello. A short note on the concepts of ontology and epistemology. I realize these are tricky challenges to get your head around, so I'll redo Guba's conceptualization of this. What question is he asking and how is he answering them? And I'll try to provide an additional metaphor, an additional example that hopefully can help you make sense of it. So, first of all, what is the question actually? Well, for one, it's the ontology. What is this world that we're investigating? When we are looking at atoms, it's a little bit easier to think of it as something that is out there. It's tangible. We can measure it, and it's even the same whether we are here in Denmark or anywhere else in the universe. We would get the same measurement model and responses. It makes sense to say, or intuitively, it's not implausible to say that these are real things that we're investigating. And the positivist would then also say, that's in the next step, the epistemology would be to say, well, and we actually also have access to getting the right picture of what an atom looked like. True knowledge, objective knowledge, should really correspond to the way the world really is. There is something independent out there. It's a little bit like the treasure hunt metaphor I gave, that there is something out there that we can find and uncover. So theories are discovered. They're not invented or shaped or anything. It's out there. And then we have post-positivists who are slightly less optimistic. They agree that yes, there is something out there that we should try to make sense of. Not just in the sense that there are facts and stuff happening, but also theoretical mechanisms, be it the supply-demand mechanism or how to motivate people. There is something out there to try to get to. However, this objectivity is really just, it's just an ideal. We can't get there in the end. It's gonna be approximations. We can try to get as close to it as possible. So we don't really find the treasure, but we're trying to get there. That also says something about how we should think of the person doing the investigation, the knower, the investigator. Especially for a positivist, we should of course be the fly on the wall that doesn't influence the data collection. That's why we like an experimental approach. It's trying to be as objective and distant and neutral as possible. Post-positivists would then say, and we saw that I think to some degree in the Bernstein article, that we can try to do as much as possible to make sure that the data we collect is not being shaped by how we ask questions. So we hire research assistants that are going to help us collect data in a Chinese factory that are Chinese themselves, so they can really blend in and the workers won't notice that something is going on. If Bernstein had been in there, he would have clearly have influenced the potential responses because he would have been the odd one out. So post-positivism would say, yes, let's have it as an ideal. Let's try not to contaminate our data. Let's try to be as objective as possible. We can still do qualitative data collection, but it should always be about being as distant, as neutral as possible, as standardized as possible. So a narrative approach, for instance, in your interview would be difficult in this framework because you want standardized responses that others would ideally also get if they ask the same question. And then the constructivism angle that Guba is posing is then saying, look, he's saying just like the post-positivist, we can't step outside our worldview. Whatever we do to try to test if our theory of motivation or job performance or whatever it is good, it's taking departure in our history, in our training, in our education, in our assumptions. We can't step outside of this world. So we should actually just accept that yes, we want to investigate motivation and job performance. We want to investigate how a teacher at a university performs at his or her job. We accept that there is no complete perfect answer to try to get to, so we'll try to to address different perspectives and try to get there in different ways. So of course the world exists and facts exist and stuff happens in the business world, but the supply demand mechanism is not something sort of independent of us in any sense. It's something that has been created by our institutions, our countries, our business environment, and these could be different. I'll get back to this in a bit. So we've already seen some of these examples here. So this is then really illustrating what a post-positivist would like to do. The Tycho Brahe example, he was trying to get a sense of the solar system and comets and planets, and in order to get a better measurement, he went into the basement in order to not have the wind influence him. And this would then be the same ideal that people should have if they are interested in attitudes, unemployment, stock markets, innovation, whatever we have in business administration field. Try not to contaminate your data collection. Try to standardize your data collection and try to keep a distance. Then the Yes Prime Minister video, what this did was then to illustrate that this could actually really be difficult in some social science settings. How can we be certain that, first of all, there actually is an answer to, in this case it was national service, but it could have been anything else when we ask people, how can we be certain that there actually is an answer out there? And that would sort of be the ontological angle of it. Is there something out there independent from our way of asking? The epistemological angle is, however we ask the question, we risk influencing whatever answer we get, as was sort of very crudely illustrated in the video, that depending on the way you framed your answers, you could get completely different ones. I guess usually it would just be slightly different answers you can get. So these are then sort of illustrating the challenges that we're facing. What question are we actually asking here, and why do we get different kinds of answers? The constructivist point of view would say it doesn't make sense to argue that we should just move our telescopes in the basement, metaphorically speaking, in the social sciences, because there is no basement to go to. There is no perfect independent point of view. And as long as we believe that, we're just fooling ourselves. We need to try to become better at becoming aware of the way that I'm framing my questions and what answers I might get out of it. And this is in a survey research, this is qualitative research, or this could also be any kind of archival research on financial stock markets or whatever it is. We have to be aware of that we've created the institutions that we're investigating. So this then also leads to the different Guba quotes that I've highlighted down here. And for instance, what I've just mentioned here, that the results of an inquiry are always shaped by the interaction of inquirer and inquired into. That's from the constructivist point of view. And the post-positivist is sort of agreeing with that, but being a bit more optimistic about how that there is a big objective out there that we can try to get to. This is in the methodological implication that I just talked about before. So here you really don't discover any connections or even discover any data. You create and construct a data set and find answers in it. So these are the different perspectives and how Guba tries to outline them. Let me try to use another example to make sense of what's going on here. Any kind of example I could have chosen, but I think this one is meaningful because we can intuitively relate to it. How should we investigate stress? Well, the assumptions we should rely on and the aims that we should have probably depend on the exact kind of question we're interested in. Okay, we're interested in how stress influences job performance. Let's say this is the overall question. But how are we going to measure this? I mean, we could use smartwatches or any other kind of physiological approach where we want to measure the blood pulse or the heart rate, or we could even sort of measure how hormones are being diffused in the body in a stressful situation. Here we could argue that there are some reasonably clear-cut definitions and measurements that we have. We have very reliable instruments that can help us measure these things. And a post-positivist sort of assumption and ideal would make sense. This is what we try to do. We try to build the best possible machines that can help us make the best possible measurements of people's stress at the moment, and then use that as an independent variable in an attempt to explain people's varying job performance. But let's say that we are actually, in these examples here, let's say that we're more interested with how people perceive their own stress situation and what they're trying to do to cope with their stress and how these coping mechanisms might influence job performance. Now we suddenly have to define how they perceive these job situations and how they define and perceive their coping mechanisms. It suddenly becomes much less clear that we can just say, look, let me measure your heart rate. This is the exact same kind of way we measure it across all kinds of human beings. It suddenly becomes a lot more heterogeneous if we are going for people's coping mechanisms and what they perceive. And suddenly we might have to go into some more qualitative approaches or read diaries or whatever kind of data we could get access to, maybe observe people, talk to people while it happens, sort of the Bernstein approach of putting observers into a company and trying to track what's going on. So now we can see that we sort of have the same overall question, job performance and stress, but depending on how we frame it and how and maybe also how optimistic we are in terms of, is it possible to get a completely standardized measure of what I'm interested in? Well, if I can, this is of course what I should do. But what phenomena am I dealing with here? Is it just the physiological response, or is it my self-perception and how I might respond to different situations? And then we risk that however questions are framed might influence us. So post-positivist would sort of, and positivists would push towards these sort of more standardized instrument-based approaches. And this is then partially depending on how optimistic and what kind of question you want to answer, but it's also depending on exactly the kind of research question that you're asking. Okay, that was just another example, quite sort of similar in style or the way that I want to illustrate this as the breastfeeding example that I've also uploaded before. I also just want to give you one more metaphor to try to make sense of this. So sort of the blueprint metaphor. I'll get to what I mean with that. Positivism is this thing that there are facts out there, and this is what we're trying to understand. Post-positivism and constructivism are then sort of saying they're having a slightly different take on this question by Ricky Gervais that we've dealt with a couple of times. What would happen if all our theory books are burned, and can we recreate the same theories? Well, post-positivism would say, well, there is an underlying blueprint, just like a blueprint for a car. There is a reality underlying how the world functions, how the business economics world functions, that we could recreate. Since there is the same underlying blueprint, we should also, in theory, get to the same kind of answers. Post-positivism would say that since there's different researchers and different approaches and different perspectives, it might not be the exact same answer, but there is the same kind of ideal that we can aspire to. While constructivists would say, well, first of all, future societies might simply be different. We might have constructed different kind of economic environments and different kinds of ways of investing money and different ways of businesses interacting. And on top of that, we might theorize completely different about it. There isn't, and this theorization would also help create the world that we have. So whatever we sort of, now we have the supply-demand mechanism that's very much linked to the way the financial and commercial world is set up. But what if we created different kind of theories to make sense of human behavior? Might we then also create different kind of societies that would appear different and would lead to different kinds of theories? So this blueprint metaphor, sort of on a very abstract level, then also illustrates how post-positivism and constructivism would disagree on a sort of very abstract overall level, while we before, with the Bernstein example, then talk more specifically about it in the stress example. Well, how do these different perspectives also lead to different method-based choices in a concrete actual situation? And the fundamental different isms are simply a way of making sense of the fundamental assumptions that different approaches, different methods then have to answering various questions.